The first time Amira realized something was wrong, it wasn't because of a message. It wasn't a late night. It wasn't perfume on his clothes. It wasn't even distance. It was a number, a single number that didn't belong. Yahya, did we make this transfer? Her voice was calm. Too calm. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom, a printed statement trembling ever so slightly in her hand. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her to feel it, deep in her chest. Yahya didn't look up immediately. That was the first fracture, because Yahya always looked up. What transfer? He asked casually, still scrolling through his phone, his tone smooth, practiced, almost rehearsed. Amira stepped closer. 380,000, it's labeled as tuition. Now he looked up, just for a second. And in that second, something passed through his eyes. Not guilt, not shock, recognition. That, he said, leaning back like it was nothing. It's a business expense. A business expense? She repeated slowly. For whose education? A pause. Small, precise, dangerous. You wouldn't understand, he said, softly, dismissively, carelessly, and just like that. Something inside Amira shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, no tears, no shouting, just a quiet, irreversible movement. Because in that moment, she didn't feel like a wife asking a question. She felt like an outsider, being managed. That night, she didn't confront him again. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't even ask more questions. Instead, she went back to the dining table, opened the laptop, and started reading. Line by line, transaction by transaction. Month by month. At first, it looked like nothing. Then it looked like coincidence. Then it looked like a pattern. And then it looked like a life. Not hers. Someone else's. Tuition, rent, business registration fees, consulting payments, travel bookings. A name began to appear. Again and again and again. Lina Abdel Rahman. Amira stared at the screen, her fingers resting lightly on the keyboard, her breathing steady, her face unreadable. And then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not out of joy, not out of relief, but out of realization. Because this was no longer a question of betrayal. This was architecture, planning, vision, investment. Her husband wasn't just cheating on her. He was building a future, carefully, patiently, intentionally, just not with her. And as the silence of the room wrapped around her, one thought settled cold and clear. If he can build in secret, then so can I. 3 years earlier, before the numbers, before the name, before the silence learned how to speak, the power had gone out again that night. Khartoum was wrapped in darkness, the kind that felt thick, almost intentional. The generator in the compound had failed, and the neighborhood had surrendered to quiet. But inside their small apartment, there was light, a single candle, flickering between them. Amira sat cross-legged on the floor, papers spread out in front of her. Notebooks, budget sheets, rough plans scribbled in careful handwriting. Yahya lay on his side, watching her. Not distracted, not distant. Present, completely present. You're overthinking it, he said softly, a smile resting easily on his face. Amira didn't look up. If we don't plan, we'll repeat the same cycle, she replied. Rent, bills, waiting. Postponing. I don't want that life. Yahya shifted closer. You won't have that life, he said. This time she looked at him, not because of the words, but because of how he said them. Certain, grounded, like a promise that had already been decided. We'll build something, he continued. Not just survive, build. He reached for one of the papers and studied it like it mattered. Like she mattered. What's this? He asked. Our savings projection, she said. If we stay disciplined for 3 years, we can put down a deposit on a house. Yahya nodded slowly. 3 years, he repeated. Then he looked at her again, and something softened in his expression. "You think small sometimes," he said. Amira frowned slightly. "Small? Not in a bad way," he added quickly. "Just safe." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. What if we don't just save? What if we invest?" Amira studied him carefully. "Invest in what?" Yahya smiled. "In ourselves." There was a pause, the kind that carries weight, the kind that quietly reshapes decisions. "We can do it together," he continued. "Everything we build side by side. No secrets, no shortcuts, just us." Amira exhaled slowly. The tension in her shoulders softened. Because this was what she had always wanted. Not perfection, not wealth, just alignment. "Together," she said quietly. Yahya reached for her hand. "To get." The candle flickered sharply, almost went out, then steadied again. He squeezed her hand. "We're not like other people," he said. "We don't break under pressure." Amira smiled faintly. "I know." And in that moment, she believed him. Completely. Without hesitation. Without defense. Without imagining that one day, those same hands that held hers in the dark would quietly build a future that did not include her. The candle burned lower. The room grew quieter. And somewhere between that promise and the life they would go on to live, something invisible had already begun. Not a crack. Not yet. Just a shift. So small. It felt like nothing at all. There are stories that begin with betrayal. And there are stories that reveal something far more unsettling. This is not just a story about a man who loved two women. It is about what happens when love becomes allocation, when trust becomes infrastructure, when a shared life quietly turns into a hidden redistribution of dreams, money, and destiny. Because somewhere inside every marriage that looks stable on the surface, there is always a question no one wants to ask. Who is the future really being built for? At the heart of this story is a marriage that appears ordinary, a husband who provides, a wife who supports, a home that functions, bills that are paid, plans that are always coming soon. But beneath that appearance, something more precise is unfolding. Not chaos, not impulsivity, but structure. A carefully constructed financial and emotional system where every sacrifice has direction, just not where it was promised. And so the real tension of this story is not simply, was he unfaithful? It is deeper than that. It is this. What does it mean when someone does not take from you suddenly, but slowly redirects everything you were building together? Because in this world, betrayal does not arrive as a single moment of discovery. It arrives as a pattern you once called normal. A delayed dream, a postponed plan, a financial explanation that made sense at the time, a quiet reassurance that everything is under control. Until one day, the pattern becomes visible, and what once felt like patience suddenly looks like exclusion. And this story asks uncomfortable questions about love and loyalty. Can someone still be providing while quietly abandoning you? Is presence enough if direction is missing? What happens when effort is not shared but selectively invested? And how do you grieve a future that was never officially taken from you, but never truly intended for you either? Because the most dangerous kind of betrayal is not the one that destroys love in a moment. It is the one that allows love to continue, while secretly changing its destination. And so, this story carries a single, quiet promise to the audience. By the end of it, you will not only understand what happened between these two people, you will begin to question something deeper. In the relationships we trust most, how often is we silently becoming someone else? The first thing people noticed about Amira and Yahya was not love. It was structure. They were the kind of couple that made life look organized, predictable in a way that felt safe, measured, controlled. Every morning, Yahya left the apartment at exactly 7:10 a.m. Not 7:05, not 7:15, 7:10. He would adjust his cufflinks in the mirror, glance once at his reflection, not out of vanity but calibration, and then pick up his keys. Amira would already be awake, not because she had to be, but because she believed in starting together even when their paths separated. "Tea?" she would ask, every morning, same tone, same calm warmth. "Light sugar?" he would reply. Every morning, even though she already knew, there was something comforting about their repetition, like a system that had been tested and proven, like nothing inside it could break. Because Amira worked remotely most days, managing financial records for a logistics firm. Numbers made sense to her, patterns made sense, order made sense. People were more complicated. But Yahya? Yahya had always felt like someone she understood. He was disciplined, quietly ambitious. The kind of man who didn't speak much about his plans, but always seemed to be moving towards something. And Amira respected that, even admired it. "Things take time," he would say whenever she brought up long-term plans. "A house, a business, children. We're building the right way." And she believed him, because he sounded like someone who knew what he was doing. But slowly, almost invisibly, their we began to shift. It started with postponements, small ones, easy to justify. Let's wait till next year. Now isn't the right time. We need to be more financially stable. Each statement made sense in isolation. Each delay felt responsible, mature, strategic. But what Amira didn't notice at first was that the future they kept postponing was never actually being moved forward. It was just being held in place. Meanwhile, Yahya was becoming more, not louder, not more expressive, but more engaged, just not in ways that directly involved her. He started taking calls outside, at first casually, then consistently. "Work," he would say. And technically, it was. He became more intentional with his time, more structured with his finances, more focused in a way that should have reassured her. But instead, it created a subtle distance she couldn't quite explain. At night, he would sit with his laptop open. "I'm focused, alert, almost energized." "What are you working on?" she asked once, leaning gently against the doorway. He didn't look up immediately. "Just projections," he said. "Future planning." "For us?" she asked. A small question, soft, almost playful. This time he did look up, and he smiled. But something about it felt measured. "For stability," he replied. Amira nodded. It sounded right. It always sounded right. Their families admired them. From the outside, they were doing everything correctly. No public conflict, no visible struggle, no drama. "Be like Amira," her cousin once said. "Patient, understanding." "Be like Yahya," someone else added. "Focused, responsible." They had become a standard, a model. And models are dangerous things, because people don't look closely at them. They just assume everything works. Inside the marriage, communication was calm, too calm. No shouting, no emotional outbursts, no confrontations. And slowly, without either of them naming it, silence became their most consistent language. Amira adapted. She adjusted. She minimized her questions, not out of fear, but out of trust. "If something is wrong," she told herself, "he will tell me." But Yahya was not withholding in the way people expect. He wasn't cold. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't distant in an obvious way. He was present, just not invested in the same direction. And that difference was too subtle to detect at first. There were moments, small ones, that tried to speak. A notification that flashed briefly before he turned his phone away. A bank alert he dismissed too quickly. A receipt he said he would sort out later. Each moment on its own, they meant nothing. Together, they were forming something. But Amira didn't chase patterns. Not in her home. Not in her marriage. Because to her, marriage was not a place for suspicion. It was a place for rest. And so she rested, while something else was quietly being built. Not recklessly, not emotionally, but deliberately. Somewhere else in the same city, a different kind of life was taking shape. A small apartment with new furniture, a business just finding its rhythm, a woman learning, growing, becoming. And behind that growth, behind every step forward, was the same invisible force, precision, consistency, funding. The same discipline Amira admired in her husband was being applied, just not in her direction. Back in their home, nothing felt broken. Not yet. Dinner was still shared. Conversations still happened. And laughter still existed. But if you looked closely, there was an imbalance. Amira was sustaining the present. Yahya was building a future. And the most dangerous part? They were not the same future. But no one said it. Not him. Not her. Because some truths do not announce themselves. They wait. They grow quietly. They take shape in the background. Until one day, they become too structured, too intentional, too undeniable to remain hidden. And when that day comes, it doesn't feel like something new has been discovered. It feels like something that has been there all along, has finally decided to be seen. It didn't begin with suspicion. It began with something small, administrative, forgettable. Amira was looking for a receipt. That was all. A simple reimbursement request from her firm had come in late, and she needed to upload proof before midnight. Yahya usually handled joint expenses, so she opened the shared folder on his laptop without hesitation. There was no tension, no instinct warning her, just routine. "Where does he keep these things?" she murmured quietly, scrolling through folders labeled with his usual precision. Utilities rent, annual statements, investments. She paused, not because the word was strange, but because it felt unexplored. Yahya spoke about investments often, future planning, growth, stability, but he rarely showed details, not in a secretive way, just selectively. Amira clicked. The folder opened cleanly, structured, organized, perfectly in line with who Yahya was. At first, nothing felt wrong. Spreadsheets, charts, forecasts, numbers flowing in disciplined columns. She almost closed it. Almost. Then she saw a subfolder. External allocations. Amira frowned slightly. External? She clicked. And that was the moment everything shifted. The first document opened was a spreadsheet. Clean, detailed, systematic. At the top, quarterly disbursement schedule. Her eyes moved slowly down the page, column by column, date by date, transaction entries, monthly, consistent. 380,000 naira, tuition 250,000 naira, housing 150,000 naira, business capital 95,000 naira, miscellaneous support. Amira blinked. Once, twice. "Maybe it's a client," she whispered, but something in her chest had already started tightening. She scrolled further, and each payment was tagged, categorized, tracked with a level of detail that went beyond casual help. This was not generosity. This was management. Then she saw it. A name. Beneficiary, Lina Abdel Rahman. Amira froze. Her hand remained on the trackpad, but her body stilled completely. "Who is Lina?" she asked the empty room. Not loudly, not emotionally, just clearly. Her mind began searching. Family? No. Work? He would have mentioned. A colleague? Possible. She clicked into another file. Education plan, LAR, inside, university admission documents, payment receipts, a 3-year academic funding breakdown, notes on career progression notes. Written by Yahya. High potential needs structured support. Strong adaptability. Worth long-term investment. Amira's fingers slowly curled into her palm. This wasn't a mistake. And this wasn't a one-time transfer. This wasn't even emotional. This was intentional. She opened another document. Property installment agreement. Her heart skipped. A one-bedroom apartment, paid in stages, registered under a proxy name. Her eyes scanned the document and then stopped. Authorized signatory, Yahya Idris. The room suddenly felt smaller, quieter, like the air itself had been pulled inward. Amira leaned back slowly, her breathing still steady, too steady. "No," she whispered, but it wasn't denial. It was realization arriving in layers. Every delayed plan, every postponed conversation, every "we need more time." It hadn't been hesitation. It had been redirection. She looked back at the screen, at the numbers, at the consistency, at the structure. And then she understood something that cut deeper than betrayal. This was not chaos. This was not weakness. This was not even desire. This was design. Yahya had not been careless. He had been precise. Amira slowly stood up, walked to the window, looked out into the quiet evening. The city moved as usual. People passing, lights flickering on, life continuing. Nothing outside had changed, but inside, everything had been redefined. She turned back to the laptop, sat down again, and this time, she didn't search for explanations. She searched for structure. She opened file after file, month after month, tracing the pattern, mapping the system. And the deeper she went, the clearer it became. While she had been waiting for their future to begin, Yahya had already started building one. Carefully, patiently, consistently. Just not with her. The front door clicked open. Yahya stepped in. "Amira," he called casually, "I'm home." She didn't answer immediately, her eyes still fixed on the screen, on the name, on the numbers, on the life she didn't know existed. "Amira?" he called again, walking closer. She finally spoke, calm, measured, controlled. "Yahya!" He stepped into the room, stopped when he saw her, saw the laptop, saw the screen. And in that moment, before a single word was exchanged, he knew. Not that she was suspicious, not that she was confused, but that she had seen everything. Amira turned slowly to face him, her expression unreadable, her voice steady. "Who is Lena?" Silence. Not the kind that waits for an answer. The kind that already understands one is coming. And just like that, the life they had been living no longer existed. Because some discoveries don't create chaos. They create clarity. And clarity is far more dangerous. The silence that followed that night was not fragile. It was controlled, deliberate, almost negotiated without words. Yahya didn't panic. That was the first thing Amira noticed. He didn't rush into explanations. He didn't overcorrect. He didn't even try to take the laptop from her. He just stood there, watching, measuring. "Who is Lena?" she had asked, simple, direct. And for a moment, he said nothing. Then he exhaled quietly, like someone adjusting to a conversation he had always known would eventually come. "She's someone I'm helping," he replied. Helping. Amira let the words settle, not reactively, but analytically. "Helping?" she repeated, her voice still calm, still even. "Yes," Yahya said, "it's not what you think." That sentence, the most predictable sentence, the most useless sentence. Amira nodded slowly, but not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "Then explain what I should think." A pause, short, precise. Yahya walked closer, but not too close. "I didn't want to complicate things," he said. Complicate. Another word that sounded responsible, measured, almost reasonable. Amira studied his face, There was no panic, no visible guilt, only control. And that was when something inside her shifted again, not emotionally, strategically, because she realized something critical. He had prepared for this, not necessarily this moment, but this possibility. Her tuition, Amira said softly, turning the laptop slightly toward him. Her apartment. Her business capital. She looked back at him. This is not help, Yahya. This is a life. He didn't deny it. That was the second fracture. She has potential, he said quietly. Amira blinked. Once. Potential, she repeated. She needed structure, he continued. Guidance, support. I saw something in her. And you didn't see it in me? Amira asked. That was the first emotional edge in her voice, subtle, but sharp. Yahya hesitated. Not long, but long enough. It's not the same, he said. Not the same. Amira leaned back slowly, something inside her, recalibrated, because this was no longer about discovery. This was about definition. She closed the laptop gently. I see, she said, and that was it. No shouting, no confrontation, no breakdown. That was what unsettled Yahya the most, because he understood something in that moment. Amira was not reacting. She was processing, and processing meant time, and time meant risk. That night, they slept in the same bed. But something fundamental had shifted. Not distance. Not yet. An awareness. The next morning, everything looked normal. Amira still woke early, still made tea, still asked, "Light sugar?" Yahya watched her carefully, trying to read what had changed. "Light sugar," he replied, but this time the ritual felt observed, not shared. Amira moved through the morning with precision. No tension, no coldness, just control. And that was when Yahya made his first mistake. He relaxed. He assumed her silence meant acceptance, or at least delay. But Amira was not delaying. She was building. That same day she began, not with confrontation, but with information. She accessed everything she legally could: joint accounts, shared documents, transaction histories. And because Yahya had never imagined needing to hide from her, everything was there. Not hidden, just unexamined. Amira didn't rush, and she didn't skim. She studied patterns, timelines, consistency, and what she found was worse than she initially thought. This had not started recently. It had started 2 years ago. 2 years of planning, 2 years of funding, 2 years of quiet redirection. Amira sat back in her chair, her mind moving faster than her body. 2 years, she whispered. 2 years of, we're not financially ready. 2 years of, let's wait. 2 years of, trust me. She closed her eyes briefly. And in that darkness, memories rearranged themselves. Every delay, every excuse, every reassurance. They no longer looked like patience. They looked like allocation decisions. And then came the second layer. Amira searched the name. Lina Abdelrahman. Social profiles, professional listings, business registrations. And then she found her. A photo. Clean, confident, young, standing in front of a newly opened office space. Caption, grateful for growth, grateful for those who believe in you. Amira stared at the image, not with jealousy, not even anger, but with recognition. This was the life Yahya had described once. Late at night, half asleep. A person just needs the right support, and they can become anything. Amira had smiled then, thinking he meant them. Now she understood. He hadn't been dreaming. He had been executing. And then came the third layer, messages. Not romantic at first. That was the shocking part. Structured, guided, mentorship. Focus on your discipline. Don't rush growth. I'll handle the financial side. Amira read them slowly, carefully. He was patient with Lina, encouraging, present, everything he used to be with her. And then the tone shifted, gradually, subtly. Proud of you. You're becoming something rare. You listen. That's your strength. Amira's fingers tightened slightly, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. He saw her, fully. And then, the final shift. Once everything stabilizes, you won't have to depend on anyone. I'm building something that will last for you. Amira stopped reading. Her breathing remained steady, but something inside her hardened. Because now the truth was complete. This wasn't an affair driven by emotion. It was an investment strategy with emotional benefits. And Amira? She had been the foundation, the stable system, the reliable base, the quiet enabler, not the priority, not the vision. That night, Yahya returned home as usual. Nothing in the apartment had changed, and everything was in place. Dinner prepared, lights warm, atmosphere calm. Amira, he said cautiously. She looked up from the table and smiled. That was the moment everything escalated. Because it was not the smile of a woman who was healing. It was the smile of a woman who had understood the system. And once you understand a system, you can dismantle it. How was your day? She asked. Normal question, soft tone, perfect timing. Yahya hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, good, busy. Amira nodded. Of course. She served him food, sat across from him, watched him eat. And for the first time in their marriage, she wasn't sitting with her husband. She was sitting across from a structure she was about to break. And the most dangerous part? Yahya had no idea. Not yet. The truth should have ended it. It should have been enough. The money, the documents, the life he was building somewhere else. But it wasn't. Because the deeper Amira went, the more the story refused to stay simple. It was no longer just about what Yahya had done. It was about how he understood her while doing it. 3 nights after the discovery, while Yahya slept beside her, steady, undisturbed, almost peaceful, Amira sat in the living room with his phone in her hand, unlocked. Not because he trusted her, but because he never imagined she would look this far. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that sharpens every thought. She opened the messages again, scrolled past the structured guidance, past the mentorship, past the carefully measured encouragement. And then she found a thread, pinned, not labeled, just prioritized. Her thumb hovered for a second, then she opened it. The tone was different, immediately. Not professional, not distant, intimate, not in the way of passion, but in the way of alignment. She read slowly, every word landing with precision. Lena, I don't understand how you manage everything so calmly. Doesn't it get exhausting? Yahya, only when I have to explain myself to people who don't think long-term. Amira's eyes didn't move. Lena, she's lucky though, she has you. Yahya, luck is not always what it looks like. A pause, not in the messages, but inside Amira. Her fingers tightened slightly around the phone. She kept reading. Lena, do you ever regret it? Yahya, regret what? Lena, choosing stability over something more. There it was. Not hidden, not coded, clear. Yahya didn't respond immediately. And there was a time gap, 6 minutes. Then, Yahya, stability has its place. Lena, and I don't. Another pause, shorter this time. Yahya, you are different. Amira exhaled slowly, her chest tight, but her face still different. She kept reading. Yahya, she understands structure. She's dependable. She keeps things balanced. Amira's eyes flickered, just slightly, not because of what he said, but because of how accurate it was. That was what made it worse. He saw her. He understood her. He just didn't choose her. The next message came quickly. Lena, And me? A longer pause. 10 minutes this time. Then, Yahya. You listen. You evolve. You don't resist growth. Amira blinked. Something inside her shifted. Not breaking, not collapsing, reframing. That because in that moment, she understood something that changed everything. Yahya had not been confused. He had not been torn. He had not been struggling between two choices. He had made a clear distinction. Amira was not competing with Lena. She had been assigned a role that made his life functional, predictable, stable. And Lena? Lena was the one he was building toward, the one he was investing in, believing in, expanding with. Amira placed the phone down slowly, her mind no longer searching for explanations. Because now, she had something far more dangerous than truth. She had clarity of intention. This was not betrayal born out of weakness. This was a system designed around prioritization, and she knew exactly where she stood in it. Not loved less, used differently, that distinction changed everything. Because pain can be endured, confusion can be questioned, but being understood and still not chosen, that creates something else, something colder, sharper, more deliberate. Amira stood up slowly, walked to the mirror, looked at herself, not with doubt, not with insecurity, but with recognition. She understood me, she whispered, then corrected herself. No, he understood me. And still built another future. That was the moment the story shifted, from discovery to strategy, from reaction to design, from pain to precision. Because now, Amira was no longer asking, why did he do this? She was asking, how do I respond? In a way that changes everything. And somewhere, quietly, without announcement, without warning. The woman who had been patient, understanding, and trusting was gone. And in her place stood someone Yahya had never planned for, someone who now saw the system clearly and was about to rewrite it. There is a moment, after truth settles, when anger is no longer loud. It becomes quiet, focused, almost intelligent. Amira didn't confront him again, not after the messages, not after the patterns became undeniable, not after she understood exactly who she had been in his life. She moved differently now, not colder, not bitter, just clear. But clarity comes with a cost, because once you see everything, you cannot pretend anymore. And pretending had been the glue holding her marriage together. 3 days passed, then 5, then a week. Yahya began to relax again. He mistook her calmness for adjustment, acceptance, maybe even forgiveness. That was his third mistake, because Amira was not adjusting. She was deciding, and the decision before her was not simple. It wasn't even just emotional, it was moral. Late one evening, she sat alone at the dining table. No laptop, no documents, no phone, just silence and herself. What do I do with this? She whispered. Because now the question was no longer, what has he done? It was, what will I do about it? Her mind laid out the options, clear, sharp, unavoidable. Option 1, confront and expose everything, destroy the illusion immediately, call his family, reveal the financial records, expose Lena, let everything collapse in one moment. It would be justified, it would be loud, it would be irreversible, but it would also make her reactive, and Amira no longer wanted to react. Option 2, leave quietly, take what she could, walk away with dignity, start over. No drama, no chaos. This option felt clean, controlled, safe, but something inside her resisted it, not out of pride, but out of truth. Because leaving quietly would mean accepting something she knew was not right, that he could restructure her life without consequence, that what he did could simply end without being understood. And then came the third option. She didn't name it immediately because it required something deeper. Not anger, not escape, precision. Amira leaned back slowly, her thoughts aligning with a calm she had never felt before. "If I expose him," she said quietly, "I lose control. If I walk away," she continued, "I lose justice." She paused. Then, "But if I understand the system," her eyes shifted slightly, not emotionally, strategically. "I can decide how it ends." That was the moment the moral line appeared, clear, unavoidable, because what she was considering was not passive. It was intervention, calculated, intentional. And she would not destroy him blindly, but she would not protect him either. She would allow truth to surface in a way that could not be denied. And that required something dangerous. Time. Time to gather everything. Time to reposition herself. Time to ensure that when the truth emerged, it would not be questioned. But there was a cost. To do this, she would have to live beside him, speak to him, eat with him, sleep next to him, knowing everything. That was the real crisis, not revenge, endurance, because every normal moment would now carry weight. Every word he spoke would feel measured. Every lie would sound clearer. Could she do that? Could she remain present without breaking? Amira closed her eyes, and for the first time since the discovery, emotion rose, not loudly, not violently, but deeply. And the memory of the candlelight, the promises, the belief, she felt it all, fully. And then she opened her eyes again, steady, resolved. "Yes," she whispered, not because it was easy, not because it was painless, but because it was necessary. Because this was no longer just about betrayal. It was about truth finding its rightful place. And if that required patience, discipline, and silence, then she would give it, completely. From that moment on, Amira stopped being a victim of the story and became its author. The collapse did not begin with shouting. It began with timing. By the time Yahya realized something was wrong, everything had already been set in motion. It was a Thursday, ordinary on the surface, structured, predictable, controlled. Yahya sat in his office, reviewing numbers on his screen, when his phone buzzed. A message, then another, then a call. He frowned, answered. "Yes?" Silence on the other end for a second. Then, "Sir, there's an issue with the account." "What issue?" Yahya asked, already irritated. "There's been a restriction placed. We can't process outgoing transfers." Yahya straightened slightly. "What do you mean restriction? By who?" "Joint authorization was triggered, sir. It requires secondary approval." A pause, small but dangerous. "Secondary approval?" Yahya repeated slowly. "Yes, sir." Amira. And for the first time in weeks, something unfamiliar entered his system. Disruption. "All right," he said, controlling his tone. "I'll handle it." He ended the call, sat still, thinking. Then his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't work. Lena. "I can't access the funds. What's happening?" Another message followed immediately. "They're saying payments are delayed." Yahya's jaw tightened. "No," he muttered. He opened his banking app, tried to move funds. Access restricted. He tried another account, pending authorization. Another, flagged for review. His breathing slowed, not out of calm, but control. "This doesn't just happen," he said under his breath. And then, the realization began. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to disturb him. He picked up his keys, left immediately. Back at the apartment. Everything was exactly where it should be. The lights were on, the table was set, dinner prepared. Amira sat calmly reviewing a document. Not anxious, not waiting, just present. The door opened. Yahya walked in quickly, not angry, not yet, but alert. "Amira." She looked up and smiled. That same smile, calm, controlled, unreadable. "You're home early," she said. "What did you do?" Yahya asked directly. No greeting, no transition. Amira tilted her head slightly. What do you mean? My accounts, he said, stepping closer. They've been restricted. Amira nodded slowly. Yes. The simplicity of the answer unsettled him more than denial would have. You authorized it? He asked. I corrected it, she replied. Corrected. Yahya stared at her, something shifting beneath his calm exterior. Corrected what? He asked. Amira closed the document in front of her, folded her hands, looked at him fully. The structure, she said. A pause. The structure, he repeated. Amira stood up slowly, not defensive, not aggressive, precise. For 2 years, Yahya, she began, you built a system. Her voice was steady, measured. Not impulsive, not emotional, structured. She stepped closer. You allocated resources, managed growth, directed outcomes. Yahya didn't interrupt, because now he was listening. And in that system, Amira continued, I had a role. She met his eyes. Stability. The word landed, heavy, accurate. Yahya's expression shifted slightly. You misunderstood, he began. No, Amira said calmly. I understood perfectly. Silence. For 2 years, she continued, what you postponed our life while funding another one. Each word landed with precision, no emotion, just truth. So I studied it, she said. The accounts, the patterns, the structure. Yahya's jaw tightened. And then, she added softly, I adjusted it. Another pause, longer this time. What does that mean? He asked. Amira reached for a folder on the table, opened it, turned it toward him. Documents, legal notices, ownership adjustments, authorization changes, everything documented, everything aligned. Joint accounts now require dual consent, she said. External allocations are under review. Proxy assets have been flagged. Yahya's eyes moved quickly across the pages. This is temporary, he said quickly. You can't just... I already did, Amira replied. Silence. Not empty, not uncertain. Final. Yahya looked up at her. For the first time, not in control. You're overreacting, he said, but the conviction was weaker now. Amira didn't respond immediately. Instead, she asked, Did you love her? The question landed differently, not accusatory, not emotional, just direct. Yahya hesitated, and that hesitation answered everything. Amira nodded slowly. I see. She stepped back, gave him space, not out of fear, but completion. I didn't expose you, she said quietly. I didn't destroy you. She held his gaze. I just made sure the truth can't be hidden inside structure anymore. Yahya exhaled slowly, his control slipping. You've complicated everything, he said. Amira almost smiled. No, she replied. I clarified it. Silence filled the room. Heavy, irreversible. Because in that moment, everything Yahya had built in secrecy was no longer his to control. And everything Amira had once believed in had transformed into something far more powerful. Awareness. And awareness, once activated, cannot be undone. The silence after the documents was not empty. It was loaded. Every word that had not been spoken for 2 years now stood between them, waiting. Yahya didn't move immediately. The papers were still in his hands, but he wasn't reading them anymore. He was thinking, calculating, trying to regain something that had already shifted. You had no right, he said finally. The sentence landed, but not the way he intended. Amira looked at him, not offended, not defensive, just attentive. No right? She repeated quietly. Yahya placed the documents on the table, his composure tightening again. You went into my accounts, my work, my private arrangements. Private. Amira nodded slowly. Private, she echoed. A small pause. Then she asked, Was our marriage private too? That hit, not loudly, but directly. Yahya's jaw flexed. And that's not the same thing. Explain the difference, Amira said. Her tone didn't rise, but the room shifted. Yahya exhaled, running a hand over his face. You're making this bigger than it is. Amira watched him carefully. Bigger than 2 years of redirected money? She asked. Bigger than building someone else's life while telling me to wait? Her voice remained steady. Bigger than calling me stability while investing in someone else's future? Yahya's eyes flickered. I was trying to manage things, he said. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Pressure. Amira tilted her head slightly. And funding another woman's life relieved that pressure? She asked. Yahya didn't answer immediately, because the question wasn't emotional, it was structural. You're reducing it, he said instead. It wasn't just about money. Amira's expression didn't change. I know, she said quietly. That stopped him, because she didn't need him to explain. I read everything, she continued. A pause. And you're right, she added softly. It wasn't just about money. Yahya's shoulders stiffened slightly. She listens, Amira said. She evolves. Each word came back to him, not as accusation, but as reflection. You saw something in her, Amira continued. Something worth building. Silence. And in me, she added, her voice almost softer now. You saw something worth maintaining. That was the line that broke the illusion. Because it was true. Completely. Uncomfortably. Yahya looked at her. Really looked at her this time. And for the first time since the confrontation began, he didn't try to correct her. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, he said quietly. Amira nodded. I know, she replied. Another pause. Because for you, she continued, this wasn't chaos. Her eyes held his. It was planning. Yahya swallowed slightly. I never stopped caring about you, he said. Amira almost smiled, not out of amusement, but recognition. That's the problem, she said. Silence. You cared, she continued. You provided. You stayed. Her voice remained calm. But you didn't choose me. The words settled. Deep. Final. Yahya looked away for a moment, as if something inside him had been exposed. You're turning this into something absolute, he said. Amira shook her head slightly. No, she said. I'm seeing it clearly. Another pause. For 2 years, she continued, you made decisions about our life. Without me. She stepped closer. You didn't ask me to build with you. A beat. You used me to stabilize what you were building somewhere else. Yahya's voice tightened. That's not fair. Amira's response was immediate. Is it accurate? Silence. Because fairness could be debated. Accuracy could not. Yahya exhaled sharply, frustration rising now. So what do you want, Amira? He asked. You've locked the accounts. You've made your point. Amira didn't answer immediately, because this was not about making a point. It was about ending a system. What I want, she said slowly, is for you to understand something. Yahya waited. This didn't start when I found the documents, she continued. Her voice softened, not weaker, but deeper. It started the first time you chose to build something and didn't include me. Silence filled the space again. And now, she added, it ends with you no longer being able to hide that choice. Yahya looked at her, really looked, not as someone he had managed, not as someone who maintained balance, but as someone who had stepped outside the system he created. You think this changes everything? He asked. Amira met his gaze. No, she said. A small pause. It reveals everything. The weight of that settled between them, because confrontation is not always about shouting. Sometimes It is about removing every place the truth can hide and leaving two people face to face with what they have become. The collapse did not arrive all at once. It unfolded, quietly, systematically, like everything Yahya had built. At first, it looked like inconvenience, a delayed transfer, a flagged account, a call that ended too quickly. Yahya tried to stabilize it. Of course he did. That was who he was. He made calls, sent emails, pulled strings. But the system he had once controlled no longer responded to him the same way. Because now, every movement required visibility, and visibility was the one thing his structure had never been designed for. Sir, we need clarification on these allocations. Sir, there are inconsistencies in the documentation. Sir, this account is under review. Each sentence, small, professional, routine, but together, they created pressure. Not emotional pressure, structural pressure, and the kind that exposes everything. And then came Lena. At first, her messages were calm, measured, still trusting. Maybe it's just a delay. I'm sure you'll sort it out. But as days passed, the tone shifted. I've been told payments can't go through. The landlord is asking questions. The business account is frozen, Yahya responded. Of course he did. Give me time. I'm handling it. It's temporary. But this time, his words had no system behind them, and Lena felt it. Yahya, what's really going on? She asked one evening over the phone. There was a pause, longer than usual. It's just a review, he said. Silence. Then, does she know? Lena asked. The question landed harder than anything else. Yahya didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation told her everything. You told me it was controlled, she said, and her voice tightening. You said everything was structured. It was, Yahya replied quickly. Was? She repeated. Another silence. And in that silence, the foundation he had built for her life began to feel unstable. Because Lena had never built from nothing. She had built on certainty. And now that certainty was gone. I trusted you, she said quietly. Yahya closed his eyes briefly. I know. No, Lena said, her voice sharper now. You made me trust you. The call ended shortly after. Not with resolution, but with distance. Back at home, Amira watched none of this unfold directly. She didn't need to, because she understood systems, and she knew what happened when pressure was applied to something built in secrecy. It didn't explode, it fractured, slowly, piece by piece. Yahya became quieter, not distant, but heavier. His movements less certain, his tone less controlled. The man who once operated with precision now reacted. That was the shift. And Amira noticed it, not with satisfaction, not with celebration, but with clarity. Because this was never about watching him fall. It was about ensuring that what he built could no longer exist in distortion. Days turned into weeks. The financial strain deepened. The external pressure increased. And eventually, the truth began to move beyond the walls of their home. Questions surfaced, quietly. How long has this been happening? Were these funds authorized? Why wasn't this disclosed? Yahya's name began to carry weight. Not admiration, not respect, uncertainty. And in environments built on trust, uncertainty is everything. Meanwhile, Lena's world narrowed. Opportunities slowed. Decisions became urgent. Stability disappeared. Not because she failed, but because the foundation she stood on was never hers. And now, it was gone. Back in the apartment, nothing dramatic happened. No shouting, no breakdowns, no chaos, just distance. Yahya still came home, still sat at the table, still existed in the same space as Amira. But something fundamental had changed. He was no longer operating above the system. He was now inside the consequences of it. And Amira? Amira did not gloat. She did not remind him. She did not repeat what had been done, because she didn't need to. The truth was no longer hidden. It was active. And the most powerful part of it all? She didn't raise her voice once, because some consequences do not require noise. They require exposure. And once exposed, they do what they were always meant to do: reshape everything. What broke first was not the marriage. It was the illusion of control. There was a final meeting, not loud, not dramatic, not the kind that belongs to chaos. It was quiet, structured, almost procedural. Amira sat at the dining table with a file in front of her. Yahya stood near the window, no longer pacing, no longer defending, just still, like someone who had finally stopped trying to manage the outcome. "I've reviewed everything," Amira said. Her voice carried no urgency, only conclusion. Yahya nodded slightly. "I expected that." That response was different now. No resistance, no counter-argument, only acceptance of a system that had already moved beyond him. Amira opened the file, not slowly, not theatrically, naturally. "I didn't destroy anything unnecessarily," she said. "I only separated what was shared from what was redirected." A pause. "That's all this was," she added. "Separation." Yahya looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, there was no strategy behind his expression, only reflection. "You were always like this," he said quietly. Amira didn't respond immediately, not because she didn't hear him, but because she was deciding whether it mattered. "I was always consistent," she finally replied. That sentence landed differently than anything else before it, because it reframed everything. Not betrayal, not revenge, consistency versus deviation. Yahya sat down slowly, not defeated in a theatrical sense, but reduced to simplicity. "I didn't think it would go this far," he admitted. Amira closed the file. "You didn't think I would see it this clearly," she corrected gently. Silence. Outside, life continued normally. Cars moved, people spoke. The world did not pause for internal collapse. But inside that room, something irreversible had already settled. "I never stopped respecting you," Yahya said after a while. Amira nodded, not emotionally, but logically. "I know," she replied. A pause. "That's what made it possible," she added softly. Yahya exhaled, slow, controlled, but no longer resisting. "So what now?" he asked. Amira looked at him for a long moment. Not as a partner, not as an enemy, but as a chapter that had completed itself. "Now," she said, "we stop pretending this was one story." Yahya didn't interrupt. Amira continued. "You built something else," she said, "and I stabilized what you left behind." A pause. "But those are not the same life." Silence. And then she added something quieter, more final. "I am not angry anymore." Yahya looked up slightly. That surprised him. "I am finished interpreting it emotionally," she said. Another pause. "What remains," she continued, "is structure." And that was when he understood. This was not reconciliation, not revenge, not forgiveness. It was reclassification. Amira stood up slowly. "I've made arrangements," she said. Yahya nodded slightly. He already knew. "And Lena?" he asked quietly. Amira paused, just for a moment. "Her life will adjust to what was actually real," she said. No cruelty in her tone, no satisfaction, only truth. Yahya looked down, not broken, not angry, just aware. "I didn't mean for it to become this," he said again. Amira responded softly. But it did. A long silence followed, not tense, not emotional, just final. And then Amira did something unexpected. She picked up her bag, turned toward the door. Yahya stood. "Amira," she paused. not turning back immediately. "Yes?" she asked. He hesitated. Then, "You were never the problem." Amira closed her eyes briefly, not in pain, but recognition. "I know," she said. Then she opened her eyes. "And neither were you," she added. A pause. "We were just building different futures." And with that, she left. No dramatic exit, no final confrontation, no emotional collapse, just departure. Because resolution, in its truest form, is not about who wins. It is about what remains when emotional noise is no longer needed. And what remained here was clarity. Yahya stayed in the quiet room for a long time, not thinking of what he lost, but of what he misunderstood. And Amira? And she walked forward into a life that was no longer defined by what was taken from her, but by what she finally understood about herself. She was never part of a broken system. She was the one who had finally stopped maintaining it. Some stories don't end with victory. They end with clarity, and clarity is heavier than revenge. Amira didn't leave that marriage as a woman trying to recover something lost. She left as someone who finally understood what had been happening all along. Not betrayal in a single moment, but betrayal as a process. Slow, structured, almost respectful in appearance. The kind that doesn't destroy love instantly, but quietly reassigns it. Because that is what hurt the most. Not that Yahya chose someone else, but that he restructured a shared life without ever announcing the change. And in doing so, turned patience into invisibility, trust into delay, and partnership into quiet exclusion. But what changed everything in the end was not exposure. It was understanding. The moment Amira stopped asking why and started recognizing how. And that shift is where the real lesson lives. Because in life, not all breakdowns are loud. Some are disguised as stability. Some are masked as responsibility. Some look like we are working on it, while someone else is already living the outcome. And maybe that is the hardest truth this story leaves behind. That love does not fail only through absence. Sometimes, it fails through misdirection. When effort exists, but not equally. When planning exists, but not together. When a future is being built, just not for both people. Amira's ending was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was not revenge-filled in the way stories often expect. It was quieter than that, more dangerous than that. It was redefinition of self, of worth, of what she would no longer tolerate as normal. Because once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. And once you understand systems, you stop begging to be included in ones that were never designed for you. So the real question this story leaves behind is not about Amira or Yahya alone. It is about all of us. In relationships, in families, in trust, in silence. Where are we being present, but not prioritized? Where are we being told, wait, while someone else is already being built forward? And what would change if we finally chose clarity over comfort? If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect deeply. Have you ever stayed in something that looked stable, but was quietly moving without you? And if you enjoy stories like this, stories that explore trust, betrayal, psychology, and the hidden structure behind human relationships, then stay connected. Because sometimes the most important truths are not shouted, but they are revealed quietly, like this one.